efforts. That's another needed action. And last but not least, it was clear that there is a lot more need to do concerted evidence gathering so we can really know what's helping the countries to achieve climate action through private sector engagement. So I will stop right there. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chiz. Time for 2 to 3 questions or short comments or reactions then between the panelists. Please, India.
Thanks, co-facilitator, and thanks for all the 3 presentations. I have a brief questions to Mr. Peter from ICC. Of course, you showed very interesting slides about the significant developments of the green bond market in various countries in the last few years and all. And I was just thinking, curious to know that since it's a debt instrument, how much is the average return which is generally provided, and is it necessary that, or is it the case, whatever experience we have, that these instruments are in these countries wherever the significant developments have taken place, these are all tax exempted? Thank you very much.
Thank you. Let's take another question or comment, if there's any. Yes, please.
The question goes to Zahir. He mentioned quite interesting points about the gaps of communications from the funds to the countries. Simple question. Is the funds are aware of these gaps or not?
Thank you very much. The gap question. And then there's one more.
Good afternoon. Just one question also for Zahir. How do you foresee the role of that some proposals submitted to the GCF are to create mini funds, really more intermediate between the Green Climate Funds and the countries? What do you see as advantages and disadvantages of this kind of new agencies, and how would you suggest to proceed forward to countries? Thank you.
If you allow me, one question that you can build into your responses, standardization. Currently, the International Standardization Organization started work on standards to report climate finance. Helpful, not so helpful, the right way, the right organization. So you heard the 3.5 questions, and who can I give the floor first? Okay, Peter first.
Sorry, I have to take your question on notice. I don't know, but it's relative to other investment vehicles. It's a fairly modest return, and off the top of my head, I'd say it's about 2%. Which leads into the next comment I'd like to make is that green bonds, the bond market, is not short-term investment. It's invariably long-term. So we aren't talking expecting it to be your return over 6 months, 1 year, 2 years. They're longer term, 5, 10, 15, 20 years. That's why the low return, but it's stable, it's known, and it's solid. Standardization. There's an very, very important point, or point for discussion. Whether it's ISO, I don't know, but I know that the UNFCCC Standing Committee on Finance is addressing this now, and as the need for there, and I mentioned it, but the need for there to be rules that are adopted at the highest level and accepted by all the people that want to participate in the market. The other interesting point from the GF presentation was that you can leverage private, or that the GF can leverage private sector funds at the scale of 1 to 8
Thank you, Peter. Chiz, you want to come in on that one?
Just quickly, if I may answer the question of if the funds are aware of the information and communication gap. Yes, we are, and it's also being identified in the evaluation that I just mentioned. So obviously, we need to be making a lot more concerted efforts. But it's not just about communicating for the sake of communicating. We need to be reaching out to the right sets of institutions and partners about the opportunities that they themselves would find useful to engage in. So.
On the standardization, you agree with your previous speaker? Okay, don't want to put you on the spot. Zahir, you got a few questions addressed to you specifically?
Yeah, I got the most questions. The funds are aware. You know, you can communicate, but are you doing the right communication is the big question. Because all the funds come to all occasions, they come to the COPs, they come here, they make presentations, but are we giving the right message is another question that you got to ask yourself. Because you don't see the result of it. We don't, you know, a big problem with the funds is how do you measure what you're doing? So if you have structured dialogues like the GCF has and that, do you count the number of participants that came, the number of papers that were delivered? Ultimately, the idea of the structured dialogue was to get good portfolios coming for funding to the board. And that is a measure of performance, but we don't measure it that way. A lot of the funds, what we're trying to instill is a much more results type of, or an outcome type of, so that your actions are based on specific outcomes that you can measure, and allows you then to better produce a product. The other thing is that we don't really bolster the partnership that we have, because the GCF is less dependent on the secretariat, and that has a big responsibility on the national designated authorities and focal points. And it's not just a question of just signing no objection letters. They are also responsible for doing a lot of communication domestically. And so, you know, we're working on the GCF board side around how we improve the country ownership and country drivenness of the portfolios, which includes working much more strongly with the national designated authorities. I think Edgar had a question about funds kind of thing. How does we've already approved a project like that. If you look at the project from the European Investment Bank, it's a fund of funds thing. We're giving them some funds, they're blending the funds with some private sector funds, they're devolving it to other structured funds, who are looking at further blending of funds. The challenge with those kind of projects is that how do we ensure that at the end of it, massive action happens on the ground? So, you know, there's two ways of looking at a project. I won't mention the specific project, but take an adaptation project. There's one way of looking at it where you're providing funding for them to do a specific adaptation activity, or there's another way of doing it where you engage with a financial institution, you create an instrument where they provide concessional finance to those farmers or whoever who wants to make use of that in terms of dealing with adaptation. And you got to ask yourself which one is more sustainable, which one is more long-term, which one becomes more predictable, where you have one which is a once-off thing, where the other one can be a much more longer-term thing that could become self-financing and not dependent on GCF resources. And so what you're trying to do with the GCF is to get people to start thinking differently, right? I didn't want to use the terminology, but in this process, we have a lot of think tanks, you know, and we have a lot. All we've spurned is a lot of think tanks and a lot of consultancies. We haven't really catalyzed action on the ground. So maybe what you really need to do is think outside the tank, right? And that's what you're trying to get NDAs, and that don't think of traditional kind of ways of dealing with things. Start coming with the innovative things, because the GCF allows you to do that. It allows you to do grants. It allows you to do concessional finance. It allows you to do equity. It allows you to do guarantees, which many of the other funds in the past didn't do. And similarly, the GCF, the GF provides non-grant instruments and the other things. So what you're looking for today is that, you know, the traditional way of doing things, we are where we are at right now, right? So you got to do things a little differently if you want to get a different result. Otherwise, we're just going to precipitate the same thing. I hope Edgar answered your question.
Thank you, Zahir. Thank you, the panelists for inspiring and interesting last round after a long day. So let's give them an applause before we close this meeting. So thanks again. Now, before we, Janine and I utilize the next hour and a half to sum up today's